Hello everyone, welcome back to Data Analysis YouTube channel. For this particular video, we will be going through Sumifs, COUNTIFs, AVERAGEIFs functions. And these functions are built up on the if function that we had gone through in a previous video. The link to that video is in the description box. The link to this practice file is also in the description box. So do well to download the practice file and learn how to use these functions on your own as you watch the video. If you're visiting this channel for the first time, please do well to subscribe and give us a thumbs up. Also include in the comment section what you want us to do. And if you know about alternative ways of doing this particular mathematical operations, please also state that in the description, in the comment section as well. If you're a returning subscriber, welcome, and also give us a thumbs up and drop a comment for us. Okay, so let's go right into it. This particular file that we have here is for a certain company that has three different departments, which are agriculture, catering, and digital skills. And this is sales records, right, for the different departments. And for each of the departments, for example, agriculture, there are three different business units for agriculture. So this is the way let's do this. And these are the three business units for agriculture, forestry, ranching, and vegetables. Okay, so each of the business units or each of the departments has um, more than two or more business units attached to it. So what we want to find out basically is the first question to say, find out the total sales, okay, that took place in the month of June alone, because these are sales records that took place in June, July, and August. So if you're asked about finding out the total sales that took place in the month of June, you can do this easily, okay, by just using the sum if formula. So you do equal to sum if and you open the bracket. So the sum if formula has three different requirements. The first thing to provide is the range, the second one is the criteria, and the next one is the sum range. So for the range, this is the column that contains your criteria. Okay, so the range is the column that your criteria sits in. And of course, this is your criteria because we are trying to find out the total sales for the month of June 2021. So June 2021 is your criteria. And the range that contains your criteria or is this particular column, column A, which is the month. So I'm going to make the selection and I'm selecting everything by doing Control Shift and the down arrow to select everything, okay, in column A. So after selecting the range, I take a comma, which is a separator in a function, and it takes me to the next requirement, which is the criteria. Okay, so of course the criteria is the month, which I have selected here, and the next requirement is the sum range. The sum range is the particular column that you're trying to add up. Okay, so in this case, we are trying to add up the sales because we are trying to find out the total sales. And I make the selection Control Shift and I hit the down arrow button to make the selection all the way down, and I close the bracket and I hit the enter button, and this is it. Okay, so if we just want to do a quick check, okay, so I am just going to sort and select only the month of June, and let me add only the June expenses, and this is what I have here. Okay, by the bottom right of the screen, 11,437,218.22, which is exactly what I have here. Okay, so the usefulness of functions is to make life easy for us, right? So that you do not have to do the sorting just like I have just done. I mean, the sorting for a single criteria might be easy to do, But when we have multiple criteria, okay, how easy will it be for us to sort? Now we go to the next part of the question that says, find out the total sales that happened in the month of June that is only for digital skills. Okay, so the department of focus here is digital skills. And like I mentioned, we have three departments. So now it has become a bit more complicated because we have an additional criteria. So when you have more than one criteria, you use the Sumifs. Okay, so the Sumifs is slightly different from the Sumif, and we're going to see how. So after typing Sumifs, I open the bracket. The first requirement is the sum range. Okay, and in the Sumif function, the sum range was the last requirement. But for the Sumifs, the sum range is the first requirement. And the reason for this is because you have multiple criteria, up to 29 criteria, okay? And if the sum range was put as the last requirement for the sum if s function, you would have had to go look for it all the way down after the 29th criteria. But this is just very logical to put it first because Excel does not know how many criteria you might have to impute. Okay, in most cases, you don't need up to 29, by the way. So, but this is just to accommodate as many criteria as possible that Excel user might want to use at that particular point in time. So for this one, the sum range, of course, we are trying to find the total sales that was done in the month of June that was specific only to the digital skills department. So the sum range is the sales, okay, which is column C. And I'm just going to highlight everything, Control Shift and the down arrow button to choose everything to make all the selections at once. And I put the comma, the criteria range 1. So the criteria range 1 is the column where your criteria 1 sits in. And in this particular example, the criteria 1 is June 2021. Okay, and the column where that sits in, it's in column A, which is the month. I just do the selection, Control Shift down arrow button, and I make all the selection and I do the comma. And criteria 1, of course, is June 2021. I do the comma as well. And it takes me to the next criteria requirement, which is criteria range 2. And that is the department, okay? The department is a column where the criteria 2 sits in, and I make the selection. Okay, so Control Shift down enables me to select everything at once, and I put the comma and I choose the criteria 2. And here we go. I close my bracket, and this is what I have just within seconds. And of course, we go to the next example where the number of criteria has increased to 3, and it's the same sum if s, so it's the same logic basically. You select the sum range, you put the comma, you select the criteria range 1. The criteria 1 is still the month, so we do the selection for the month, and we put the comma, and the criteria 1 is the month. We go to criteria range 2, which is digital skills, and it sits in the column of department. And I do the selection for that, Control Shift down arrow button, and we go to select the criteria 2. And I put the comma, and it takes me to criteria range 3. Now, IT support, okay, sits in the column of business unit. So the criteria range 3 is my business unit, and I'm just going to make the entire selection, and I put the comma. There was an error here. Okay, and I put the comma and make the selection for criteria 3, and I close my bracket, and this is what I have. Easy peasy, just like the way you've seen it. Okay, so in the fourth example for the Sumifs, you can also have, okay, a criteria like this that says, I want to find out the total sales that happened in the month of June for digital skills that is greater than 10,000. Okay, whichever currency you're using, 10,000 Nigerian Naira in this particular situation. So, of course, you can have this, and you have two options. It's either you put the greater than 10,000 as in a cell so that you can reference it, or you can put it manually in the formula. So let's do that. Sumifs, you open the bracket, you choose the sum range, and put the comma. Criteria range 1 is the month. You put the comma and you choose the criteria 1. And then you choose the criteria range 2, which is the department. That is where the digital skills criteria sits in. And I choose the criteria as well. And I put a comma. And criteria range 3 is the sales amount, okay, that is above 10,000 Naira. And so this is my criteria range 3. The sales is my criteria range 3. It can be the sum range and also be the criteria at the same time, okay? It doesn't matter. So this, and I'm going to choose the criteria, and this is what I have, okay? So this is what I have, okay? And like I mentioned, we can also put this criteria manually. And of course, you know that you have to put the quotation marks so that Excel can recognize that. 10,000. And this is what I have, okay? So it's the same thing. You can put this criteria greater than 10,000 manually in the formula, or you can put it in a cell so that you can reference it. So that's all we have for the Sumif and the Sumifs. And then we go to the next one, which is the COUNTIF and the COUNTIFS. So the COUNTIF and COUNTIFS is slightly different from the Sumif because the number of requirements are not the same. You're not adding values this time. You're not summing values. You're just counting how many. Okay, so you have a group of things and it's like how many things are there. Okay, so for the first example, it says how many sales were made in the month of August? How many? So we open the bracket after writing the count if function, and then it's asking for just the range and the criteria. Okay, we can see how the count if has only 2 requirements, but the sum if had 3 requirements. Okay, so it's asking for the range, and the range is where the criteria sits in the column that criteria sits. Okay, so in this case, the criteria is August 2021, and of course, the range is going to be the month. So we just do the selection, Control Shift down button, and then I put the comma and I select the criteria. Okay, and this is what we have. So we had 155 transactions that took place in the month of August. So for this, I'm just going to take out the zeros. Okay, and we go to the next. Sorry, so COUNTIFS instead. So as I open the bracket, I have this criteria range 1 and criteria 1. Of course, we did not see a sum range, right? So it's just taking us directly to the criteria range 1 and criteria 1. So the criteria 1 is August 2021. So one of the key points is that you need to understand what your criteria is first. Ask yourself, what is my criteria? And then, where does my criteria sit? Where the criteria sits is your criteria range. Okay, so knowing your criteria helps you to know your criteria range. So in this case, your criteria 1 is the month, okay, and that sits in column A. So this is why I'm making the selection for column A. I put the comma and I choose my criteria 1, and I put the comma and the criteria range 2. So the criteria 2 is agriculture. And where does this sit? It sits in column E, which is the department. So I make the selection for this. I put the comma and I make the selection for the criteria 2, and I hit the enter button. And this is what I have. Okay, 107 transactions or sales took place in the month of August that was related only to the Department of Agriculture. So we go to the next example, and I'm just going to format, okay, by making sure that there are no zeros popping up at the end of the day. So we go with COUNTIFS, we open the bracket. Now we have three criteria, okay? So we'll go, the criteria 1 is the month, August 2021, and then we choose the criteria range, and we put a comma, and we select the criteria 1 and we put a comma. It takes us to the next requirement, criteria range 2. So the criteria 2 is agriculture, that sits in column E, which is the department. I hold down the shift, the control button, and the down arrow at the same time to enable me make all the selections at once. So the criteria 2 is agriculture, which I have selected, and I put a comma. It takes me to the criteria range 3. Okay, and the criteria 3 in this case is ranching. Ranching, where does this sit? Okay, it sits in the column with the header business unit, column B. Okay, so I go and make the selection. Control Shift down arrow button makes me have all the selection at once. I put the comma, which is the separator, and I select the criteria 3, which is this, and I hit the enter button. So 41 transactions or 41 sales transactions took place in the month of August for agriculture, and even more specific to the business unit, ranching. Okay, this is how easy it is for you to use COUNTIF to achieve this. So we go to the next one, which is AVERAGEIF. Okay, AVERAGEIF is basically trying to know what is the average sales or what is the average of what you're looking for. This is very similar to the SUMIF and the SUMIFs. It's just that this time around, you're not summing, you're getting the average instead. Okay, so we're going to type the equal to sign, average, and average if instead. And we have the range, very similar to, this is very similar to the SUMIF, okay, function that we did earlier. So average if, and the first requirement is the range. So like I mentioned, the range is the column where your criteria sits in. And of course, the criteria is July, okay, which is the month. So that is our range. And I put the comma, and I select my criteria, and I put the comma. And of course, the average range is the column that you want to get the average. So the column of the values that you're looking for the average. You close the bracket, hit the enter button, and this is what I have. So this is the average of all the sales that took place in the month of July. And we go to the next one, average if s. Okay, and same logic as the Sumifs. Okay, the first requirement is the average range, because like I mentioned, the criteria range extends to 29 criteria. Okay, so this is why the average range is coming first, so that you can make a selection first. And the placement of the requirements is not the same, of course, for the average if and average if s, for very obvious reasons. So the average range is the column that you want to find the average, the column of the values that you want to find the average. And after making that selection, I go for my criteria range 1, which is the column where my criteria sits in, where my criteria 1 sits in. And my criteria 1 is the month, which is July. I make the selection, and I select my criteria 1, which is this. And I have the criteria range 2. My criteria 2 is catering, and catering sits in the column department. So this is why my criteria range 2 is the department, and I select my criteria 2, and I close the bracket and enter. Now, this is the average of all the sales that took place in July for the catering department. And we are going to go to the next example, which gives us 3 criteria. Okay, so I make the selection for the average range, I put comma. The criteria range 1 is where my criteria 1 sits in, which is still the month. And I select the criteria 1. Okay. And criteria range 2, my criteria 2 is catering, and it sits in the in column E, which is the column for department. And I make the selection all the way down, and I select my criteria 2. And then my criteria 3 is where my criteria range 3 is where my criteria 3 sits in. Cupcakes, of course, sits in column B, which is the business unit, just like we can find here, cupcakes. Okay, so I do the selection all the way down. I put the comma, and I select my criteria 3. And this is what I've got. So this is very perfect, right? So this enables us to know the average of the sales of the cupcake sales that was made in the month of July. And of course, cupcakes, it belongs to the department catering. So this is all we have for this particular tutorial. We've understood how to use Sumif, Sumifs, Countif, Averageif. So please give us a thumbs up if you like the contents of this video, and also drop a comment in the comment section. Hit the notification bell so that you will get prompts whenever we upload new videos, and of course subscribe to the YouTube channel. Thank you so much. See you another time. Bye bye.